Thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to give it just one more minute to let folks transition over from, whatever meeting took them to this moment, especially where it's lunchtime out on the West Coast. I feel like I need some background music or something here for everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everybody for joining us today for our first Inspired Internet Pledge convening of the year. This is the Collaborative Guardians of Digital Wellness webinar. This is an Inspired Internet Pledge event, and it's hosted by Scroll by Choice. So Riz, who you see here on your phone, is the mastermind and brains behind this whole endeavor. He's put together a great run of show for us today. Just so everyone knows, the webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with folks who were unable to join us live today. We'll also provide it on our Inspired Internet Pledge website, and I believe Riz is going to provide it on the Scroll by Choice website, so it'll be available afterwards. Everyone should see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please use it liberally. Send us questions as you have them. And we will try to save as much time as possible for our panelists to answer questions. What we're going to do today is we have a few minutes to sort of set the stage, provide a welcome. Then we'll do our first expert panel with a full group discussion. We'll have a little intermission to give everybody time to go refill coffee, water, tea. And then we'll come back to our second expert panel, navigating the digital wellness ecosystem. Before we get started into that, I want to share with everyone a really quick link here. One thing that we hear consistently in our Inspired Internet Pledge convenings is that folks really want to be able to make connections with one another. So we're trying something new this time. This is a link to a shared Google spreadsheet. If you want to be contacted, or if you're willing to be contacted for networking purposes, please feel free to go ahead and put your name and contact information into that spreadsheet. Just understand that it is an open spreadsheet for everyone on this call, and by sharing your information there, you're agreeing for folks to contact you. On the flip side, if you go into that spreadsheet and contact folks there, please do don't spam people, and please reach out for connections in order to move this work forward. So very quickly, for folks on this call who might not be members of the Inspired Internet Pledge yet, the Digital Wellness Lab launched the Inspired Internet Pledge. This is now our second year. Our founding signatory was Pinterest, and we now have over 50 signatories and advisors to the pledge. The pledge is a commitment by all who work within the digital ecosystem to unite with the common goal of making the internet a safer and healthier place for everyone, especially for young people. If we get it right for young people, we've probably improved the situation for everyone who is engaging online. The pledge is oriented around three core principles: tuning for well-being, listening and acting on what we learn from those who have been harmed online, and committing to openness. And so that is what you're seeing here. Committing to openness means we are collaborating, we are working across boundaries and across even just focus areas to amplify everyone's perspectives and what everyone has to bring to the table to really pursue solutions at a faster clip and in a more impactful way. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our facilitator, Riz Vazir. He is the founder of Scroll by Choice. He is going to fill out the Google spreadsheet because he would like everyone to contact him to talk about this work. And Riz is going to talk with us a little bit about what brought us here today, and then he'll be our facilitator for the day. So Riz, I'll hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Corey. I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us on Safer Internet Day to talk about what I think is and I think you all share that similar sentiments, that this is an important topic to be talking about. The idea of a healthier internet, that's an extremely nuanced idea. So many of you have written blog articles, read books, maybe even contributed to papers that delve into the nuances and complexity of this topic. At Scroll by Choice, we're simple people. We try to keep things simple. And the way we talk about a healthier internet is like this. We say that the internet is not free. Every time you scroll, you click, you like something, you get notified about something, there's a tax that you pay. And that over time, that tax accumulates. And how do you pay for that tax? It's not always through the dollars, except during tax season. It might be when you are unable to watch a football game without also tracking it on your phone and still not being able to tell the score. That's how you pay for it. You pay for it by not being able to imagine a new idea without asking a chatbot first. That's how you pay for it. You pay for it when you worry about your kids when they haven't looked up from their phone at dinner. That's how you pay for that tax. And you pay for it when you turn to your email before you turn to the person sleeping next to you. That's how you pay for the tax. So a healthier internet to us is not a world without technology. It's simply a world where you lower this tax for everyone. You still use the internet, just don't pay as much tax. And Scroll by Choice is not alone in this journey. And today you are going to hear from individuals who are doing this work of a healthier internet. These are people who aren't just sitting on the sidelines lamenting about, the human tech relationship on LinkedIn posts. These are people who are actually bringing solutions to life. And that's the nature of a solution provider. Corey talked about this being the first convening of solution providers, and that is what solution providers do. They birth new ideas and they test them in their context. And so the panelists today that you'll hear from are doing this either through formal organizations such as Scroll by Choice, or they're doing this in the context of their work, whether it's being at a big company or providing support to parents in the community. And so without much ado, that's enough about us. That's enough about why we do this stuff. Let's talk about the panelists. Corey, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panelists.
I have entirely too many screens right now. Speaking of taxes. So our first expert panel today brings together key stakeholders who are working to understand and address the impacts of technology on human experience. So they're going to explore critical challenges and questions about the impacts of tech on academic outcomes, mental health and physical well-being, and the future workforce. So I want to welcome to the panel Devi Natarajan, a licensed clinical professional counselor who is also the founder and director of her own private practice, MindTude. And Devi, you'll be able to share much more about that during the panel. Kaitlin Tiches, who many of you probably know as the knowledge manager and medical research librarian here at the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's Hospital. And for these purposes, very important to know that she is also a former high school teacher. Duke Nelson, who is the global learning lead at Microsoft and parent of, I believe, 3 children, so has 4 children, so has a lot to offer from both the professional and personal life. And just to let everyone know, Yael Fine was hoping to join us, but has unfortunately been hit with the flu, which is very popular right now. But Yael's experience has helped to craft the questions we'll be discussing. So Yael is here in spirit, and we hope that she gets well soon. And then Riz, who you've already met, will be our facilitator today. So I'll hand it over to you, Riz, and folks who are not active on this panel, if you want to go off screen, that way people can focus on this round's panelists. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. And again, as you're listening to the panel, if you have questions, please do keep them. We will come around to audience questions as well. But Before I get started, I always like to make panelists real for the people listening. Sometimes we put panelists on a pedestal, and these are very important people who do very important work, but they're also living a normal life like you and I. And so, maybe Davey, I'll start with you, and then we'll go around Robin, Kaitlin, to you, and Duke, which is maybe start us off with what is a digital wellness tip that you personally try to follow, but sometimes struggle with? Because
Yeah.
no one is perfect. So let's start with you, Davey, and we'll do a round robin around the place.
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question, but hey, you know what? As a therapist, I often say before we can change or fix a problem, we need to acknowledge we have a problem, right? So here I am acknowledging my problem. I have a secret to guilty pleasure. I often say that if I wasn't a therapist, I would have been a paparazzi. I love celebrity gossip and I engage with it in a very embarrassingly long time. In fact, this past Sunday after Super Bowl, I spent an hour after Super Bowl, which ended very late, by the way, an hour afterwards researching the dating history between Serena Williams and Drake. Found a lot of interesting facts. Well, maybe questionable facts, but so that is, a habit that I want to move away from. So a tip that I try to follow, right, that I give to my own clients is to put the phone away at least an hour before bedtime, right? No digital, tools, not TV, phone, trying to put it away at least an hour before bed. I struggle with that because it's just so interesting, just everything that goes on in celebrity life. Gossip itself is okay. I actually listened to an NPR segment yesterday with this journalist who's writing this beautiful memoir about gossip and how gossip is actually necessary. It's a necessary part of understanding who we are and the world around us. So gossip itself is not bad, but I think the length of time that I engage with it, I think it can be fixed a little bit. So one thing that I really want to work on and I continue to struggle with is putting my phone away at least half an hour before bedtime.
Now, tell me that's not an honest response. Right? Thank you, Davey, for sharing
Of
that.
course.
We're all a work in progress. Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you to share your perspective.
That's actually a great one because mine is very similar in that the late night researching is what I do as well. So I do have a penchant for celebrity gossip, but I also am the kind of person who just as soon as the and I need to know the answer. So I am definitely like a 11 p.m. Reddit scroller, trying to find very specific information or somebody's story. So I have started trying to put my phone. I don't love to have my phone in a totally separate room because I can sometimes use it as my alarm clock, but I have started putting it across the room because once I'm in bed, I'm too lazy to then get back up. And also, then I am not necessarily a morning person. So when the alarm does go off, I now have to not just roll over and snooze it, but get out of bed to turn it off. So, it helped curb some of my, desire to just keep scrolling and keep finding new things. And it also helped me get out of the bed a little bit earlier in the morning instead of hitting snooze multiple times.
You're on a mute. But Caitlin, here's a fun fact on Reddit. You talked about Reddit. People that stay longer on Reddit. So let's say you've been using Reddit for, let's say, 3 to 5 years. You spend about 20 minutes on an average. That's their numbers from their SEC filings. If you stay with Reddit for about 7 years, you end up spending almost 45 minutes a day on Reddit. This is again Reddit's products SEC filings. The longer you are a subscriber to that idea, the more time you spend there. So again, all are human. We're all working through
Yeah.
it. Duke, I'll let you share your experience.
Oh, well, and I don't know, maybe mine is probably different or weird. So I should set the context. I have ADHD, and so if I have an idea or a thought in my head, I have to engage either pen or paper or sometimes an electronic device to explore, research, figure out that idea. And I could map out an entire house remodel or build a table or a bookshelf or redesign my kids' bedrooms all at one sitting. The habit that I try to break is leveraging the tool versus toy. So if I'm using it as a tool, I'm like, I'm okay. I'm all right with that. But when I spill over into like Facebook Reels and I'm watching video after video getting sucked into doom scrolling, that becomes the toy part. And that has been, I'd say, my biggest struggle. Although I would say I'm very proud of my heavily curated Reels profile. There's only like home plans and woodworking videos that come up, which is great. Um, but for me, I can't not sleep with the phone next to my bed because I often will wake up in the middle of the night with an idea, and if I don't get it out of my head, I won't be able to go back to sleep. And one of the ways I do that is by using my device.
Duke, the reality that technology today plays such an integral role in supporting us, right? Whether it's scribing at night or navigating through traffic because I have no directional sense and will lose myself in my neighborhood. Those are all real uses of technology. So I think you're that tension, or toy versus tool, that's a real tension. And thank you for calling that out. Maybe we'll stay with you, Duke. Every year at Microsoft, Duke, you see hundreds of multi-generational people come into the companies for the first time. Many of them now are Gen Z employees for whom this could be their very first professional job. And so when you onboard these individuals, what strategies are you and your team implementing in their onboarding efforts to orient, particularly the younger crew, from tech distractions, things that we always read about how Gen Z is under attack from all of these tech distractions? How are you at Microsoft helping onboard this young crew of people, making sure that they are well settled and productive in their journeys?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that we notice as a trend, and we have a phrase at Microsoft called executive maturity, which is just another word for like professionalism. And we do notice that there is a gap in skill when folks are entering the workforce, and part of it is this is a generation that is not afraid to ask for the things that they want or need, but maybe doesn't know the best way to ask for to get the result that they want. And so we invest, especially with our early in profession folks, we invest a lot of time really talking through some of the more human aspects of communication, especially since we are, for the most part, hybrid or virtual in all of our interactions. And that gap we've just seen kind of grow since COVID, but we've tried really hard to target very specific skills and competencies that we can explain and articulate and allow them to practice in a safe space. So then when they are getting in front of an executive or when they go to their manager with a problem or concern, they understand how to interact in a way that will get them the result they want.
Yeah, I know this is it's so good, Duke, because again, when we think about digital wellness, we don't necessarily always think about the workplace, but clearly you're making space for this younger audience to step in, orienting them to support them through that journey as well.
Yes. It is interesting because a lot of I would say a lot of the problems we see or challenges that we face are across all generations, right? And maybe at their root. And I think some folks just work through them differently. And so understanding those generational differences is helpful, but really understanding the root cause is more helpful. Like, I'm 52. I struggle with distractions. I think that it would be easy for me to be lumped into the same category as an early in profession if I'm not aware of those things, right?
Fantastic. Thank you, Duke. Devi, I'll turn to you. You see adults, young adults that are in college, so maybe a step before they join Duke's company. And your students are often in pressure cooker situations because they're at high stress colleges. I think Northwestern and University of Chicago are primarily your students. And so in your practice as a therapist, what are you saying to these individuals, these young adults, to coach them so that they can better balance themselves against the downsides of excessive unmanaged screen time?
Yeah. So, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, Riz, that I work I work with like digital wellness in the context of my therapy practice, right? So a lot of my clients, young adults between 19 and 25, 27, they come to me not directly because they're struggling with their digital use. They come to me because they are going through symptoms of stress, anxiety, depression. And when we begin to look at the reasons as to what triggers it or what intensifies an already existing kind of struggle, we then begin to see a pattern there of digital use, right? Excessive social media use and such things. So when they come to me, they already have, especially when it comes to like digital use, they've already tried different things, right? So then I take that and I like present it in a different way. So for example, um, what I'm seeing with this population is, they are using digital media, whether it be social media or like even video gaming and things like that. For two, if I were to like really categorize this into two big themes, right? One big theme, I would say, they are over reliant on digital tools for social connection and as a way to regulate emotion, basically, right? Social connection, when we talk about social connection, social connection is an essential factor in healthy human functioning. It's an innate part of just human nature itself. And evolutionarily, connection meant belonging and security. And for our ancestors, belonging to a tribe or community meant not being killed by a predator, right? So we don't have to worry about being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger any longer, but every research on longevity and happiness shows the crucial role that social connection plays, right? So for my population, young adult population, they think that social connection means, liking a post on Instagram or posting something on Instagram or TikTok and things like that. And that is how they keep in touch with each other, which is fine, but an over reliance on social connection exclusively on online mode, in an online mode, right? That is the problem that they come to. That is the trend that I see in terms of coaching them, right? So when they have when we begin to notice a pattern of excessive digital use, which is then increasing their stress, once we identify that, what I try to do is, try to understand what they've done already, what they've tried, try the tools that they've used already to reduce their digital use. The things that they often use is, deleting their Instagram app, any type of social media app from their phone for a temporary period of time. They put the phone away, when they're studying, when they're focusing on something, they try to put it away. Physically, they're not able to get it very immediately. And then they try to limit their screen time. All these methods work, but temporarily they work. And then what ends up happening is when they add back their social media app or they ignore their time limits, what they feel like disappointed in themselves, right? They feel like they have like a moral failing almost. So what I do, and we all know what that is, like that guilt and shame when we feel like we've let ourselves down, that impacts like our whole sense of self, right? So they've tried that, and so what I do then is I bring their attention to, I first help them. I do three things. One is I help them build awareness into their digital habits, right? So the first few weeks are simply observing your habits. Basically, how many hours are you spending in a day scrolling through social media, playing video games, whatever it is, right? Online games, playing with friends online. So the first few weeks we're simply observing how many hours are they spending in each of these things. And that is it. No judgment, no trying to change anything, simply observing. The second, after that, the next few weeks are it's more focused on what feeling do you have in that moment, right? What emotion drives your habit? So basically, and a pattern begins to emerge, right? A lot of young adults, they feel bored, and so they reach for their phone. They feel overwhelmed and stressed by their, current environment, very challenging academic environment. So then when they're sitting there trying to type a 30-page paper and it feels so overwhelming, they feel stressed, they reach for their phone as a way of avoidance and procrastination and distraction, right? So then we begin to identify what emotion drives you to reach for your device. And then finally, which is, I think a bulk of the work happens, is I use a lot of mindfulness in my work. And so what I end up doing is then they've already, through these weeks, they've already practiced being mindful, observing their habits, identifying emotions behind their habits. So then what we end up doing towards the end of this process is I bring their attention to that little space between feeling and acting on our feeling, right? We do this all the time, right? I mean, even if we feel an itch, we scratch. We don't think about it. It's very automatic. We feel the itch, we scratch, right? So a lot of our habits also are formed that way. We want to do something, we have an urge, and then we want to to satisfy that urge. So bringing your attention to that little space between feeling and acting on it makes them aware that they have a choice. They have a choice to act differently, right? So when they become aware of that tiny space that I'm feeling bored and the urge is to go reach for the phone, but if I choose differently, I don't have to give in to that urge. I can do something different, right? So once I bring their attention to that little space, that's where I really work hard with them to empower them to choose differently, right? So that's kind of just an overview of just how I coach, or like how I bring this into therapy.
You know what I love, Devi, between what you said and what Duke you had mentioned earlier, is that you're both addressing audiences not at the topic of digital wellness per se. You're not sort of hitting them to say, hey, you came here because you're, feeling this problem. They're feeling something different. They're feeling either not the executive maturity that they should have, or they're feeling the stress, as you talked about, Devi, and you're coaching them. And maybe at the heart of that feeling somewhere is the digital patterns that you're trying to course correct around, and maybe
Yeah.
give them alternate patterns as well. So I love and I love the time that you're taking, Devi, to take your students through this journey, right? Because it is a journey. It's not an on and off switch. Kaitlin, I'll turn to you. Kaitlin, you spend a lot of time both from a perspective of the lab, where you think about this topic quite deeply, I'm sure, but also that you've been a former teacher. You've talked to parents. You've seen young students in this space. And there is no place, I think, where this topic becomes as incensed or as passionate when it comes to young kids, right? We feel like everyone wants our young generation to be oriented in the appropriate manner and not be ad clicking machines. But when you speak to parents and when you speak to families, what are some questions that you receive? What are some of the challenges that families talk about in being able to implement solutions that you might recommend to them? What are sort of the real world challenges that they're pushing back on?
Yeah, I think thinking about it as a whole family scale is often one of the biggest boundaries to even implementing some of these issues. So because we have such a focus on young people, but young people are not a monolith, so everybody has, one child might be using TikTok as a creative outlet. So that's very different than using it, just scrolling or just kind of passively going through other people's content. And then siblings, kind of everybody is at a different developmental stage. So, one child might need more kind of strict time guidelines, but, as they get older, it might become less about the time spent and more about the content that they're consuming, or, the apps that they're using. So it becomes a really multifaceted issue. And I think when there is an idea of like a one size fits all, it can either feel like, okay, I have an answer, but then when I try and implement it, it's just not working, or it just feels like that's not going to work for my family. So I think really focusing in on like what are the changes that you want to make within your family, or when I talk to teachers, like within your classroom, is really important. So say a family has kind of different ages of their children, thinking less about like, okay, this many hours for this child and this many hours for this. How can we create spaces where we're not using our screens? Because I think, as adults, we also have concerns about this because we feel like we need to be connected all the time, right? A teenager might feel like they need to be responding in their group chat all the time. We might feel like we need to be checking our work email. Even if our boss, Corey, I'm calling you out, even if our boss says, please don't answer my emails very late at night. So we really feel that connection as well, and we feel that pressure. So instead of, having these different rules for everyone, making expectations of, okay, we know that we might need to check this, you might have extra homework tonight, but always dinner time is a time where we all put our devices away. So focusing less on the rules of each device or the screen time, and really centering on those non-digital experiences. So every weekend we are going to go to the park together. Like I said, dinner time is always a screen-free zone. So emphasizing those in-person experiences can help mitigate some of those effects of feeling like we need to turn to the screen in that moment because the expectation is that's not there. I think one of the other things that's really difficult is it's hard to understand like what's appropriate, what's not, how to talk about this. And I think no matter what the rules in your family are, because like I said, everybody's going to have different needs or, expectations or, belief systems about what is and isn't appropriate. Something I always emphasize is just as children get older, maintaining open communication. So, when children are very young, it's very common to watch things together or play video games that are really family oriented. But as children get older, some of that tends to fade away. Kids are playing video games that you might be less interested in, or they're using apps that are, you're not connected with them. But I actually read something really interesting this week about video gaming, and over a quarter of teenagers said that they wish their parents played with them more. So that desire to connect with your parents in these media spaces doesn't really diminish. Like it's still kind of this bonding experience. So one of the other things you can do, you can have these screen-free spaces, these expectations, but also you can engage with them and make them understand that, these are spaces, I want to understand why you like this. And if something were to happen that made you uncomfortable or you encountered something, I am a safe person for you to come to, and my first response is going to be wanting to solve the problem and not some sort of consequence. Because we know that if kids feel like the first thing that's going to happen is their phone's going to get taken away or their video game's going to get taken away, they will have that experience and they'll hide it and they won't share it. And, that harm will continue to perpetrate. Instead of, solving the problem because they feel like they've kept that open communication. So I think, some of the issues that parents struggle with are really kind of those differences of needs. So I really focus on those screen-free zones instead of screen rules. And then also, the fear that as children grow up, you're going to become less aware of what they're doing online, continuing that communication and continuing engaging with what they're engaging with.
There's so many good things there, Kaitlin. I love the idea, first of all, of sort of steering away from hard and fast rules, right? Which is one size fits all, or this is the right way to do it, and this is the wrong way to do it. Which leads me to a question, maybe for everyone on the panel to jump on, which is success, right? What does success look like for you and the people that you serve in this process? Because one of the hardest things, and I say this from my own experience when we talk to clients, they all come to us with different measures of success. Some people want to be productive and they just want to be able to focus. Others say, look, I just want to be able to sit down with my spouse or better half and have a conversation without being interrupted, right? So it could mean a variety of things to different people. And Kaitlin, to your point, people should aspire to different things that work for their family. But maybe Duke and Devi, if you all jump in to say, what does success look for you and the people that you serve in these spaces?
Well, I want to echo something that Davey said around this idea of mindfulness. There's a saying that I like to use when we're onboarding people and as they're exiting, that inspiration comes from working, and it's not about, oh, work harder. It's about really be aware of the work that you're doing, and any menial task can have purpose and have depth in the experience. And so if you find yourself sort of distracted or doom scrolling, or I mean, I also liken it to eating cotton candy. Like if you're shoveling cotton candy in your mouth, you're not aware of how much you're eating or how it even tastes. You're just shoveling it in. That's a problem. So for us, success is really understanding and being aware of how to use these tools and use them to the best of my ability, and leverage them in a way that allows me to, I don't know, close more sales or get promoted or do all the things that I want to do in my career, versus being sucked into them or dominated by them. So for me.
Yeah, the balance is so critical to draw out. Davey, anything to add there?
Yeah, of course. When it comes to my work, right, there is a way to measure success, right? Of course, there's an overall improvement in mood and things like that. At the same time, I do have, every 6 months, I kind of do an assessment, a treatment plan update. And so when I have that conversation with my clients, there is a metric, like 1 to 5 rating scale, a self-reported rating scale, and I can also sense a shift in their level of stress and things like that. So I do have like actual measurements of like how stressed are you, sleep quality, how many hours, how in the quality of sleep, appetite, that's a big one. When you're stressed and anxious, your appetite is gone, your sleep quality is gone. So there's ways to measure like whether there's an improvement in appetite, exercise, sleep, symptoms of anxiety, depression, as well as stress. So it's a more like, it's a 6 month kind of reassessment every 6 months to just kind of, get a sense of whether there has been an improvement in the overall well-being of the client. And also practices, right? Like they begin to be curious about mindfulness and meditation. And, when I work with them for about 6 months, that's when I begin to see that the meditation practice has become a part of their everyday routine. That is a huge indicator that a shift has happened, right? When, like Duke said, like they become more aware of their actions. And when they're more aware, they feel more empowered to make the right choice. Not the right choice, but to make healthier choices.
A better choice.
In however they define it, and however they
Exactly.
define
Right,
it.
exactly.
I think at this point, I want to invite the audience. If you are thinking of questions for the panel, you should certainly start to plop them into your Q&A box in Zoom. I will ask one more question for the panel, but then we'll open up to any questions that the audience might have. And so this is for everyone, Kaitlin, Devi, and Duke. As this is not a challenge that is going to be addressed by one person or one organization or one role in society. This is not just all on big tech, or this is not just all on government to solve or companies to solve. So how do you, if you had a magic wand, if you had to sort of, and I know you think about this topic, how do you think about employers, schools, healthcare, non-for-profits, everyone coming together with a unified approach to digital wellness? What would be useful in furthering this effort? What would be of greatest value to your work if something like this existed in the world?
We're talking about not just structural and cultural factors here, right? We're talking about in changes to individual behavior. So then it becomes like a shared framework, right? That ensures consistent digital wellness education and policies across schools and workplaces. And, just like just, pretty much across, like even in individual homes, right? So there has to be evidence-based interventions to help individuals self-regulate, collaborative research between educational institutions. Parent engagement is a big one. And so there has to be initiatives around kind of aligning digital wellness strategies between all these different, spaces that we're talking about.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, the idea of evidence-based, right? I think that's the hardest thing to sort of, at least I feel, the hardest thing to sort of connect across. But Caitlin and Duke
Yeah.
certainly jump in.
Well, I go back to the question you asked, like if I could wave a magic wand, and I think of language. And if I could wave a magic wand, and if everyone maybe spoke the same language when it came to digital wellness, to even having foundational understanding of the demands and the experience, and we all had kind of a shared common, and I go back to Devi's again, the word framework you use. If there was a consistent framework and we all knew it, and we all knew that this was the framework and this is how we operated within it, I think that would be such a huge win to be able to make cultural change in this space. Until we can get to that baseline, though, I think it's going to be whack-a-mole, right? We're just going to have to take things as we get them and try and figure them out. But yeah, that would be my first instinct.
Fantastic. Caitlin, anything to
Yeah,
add?
I would say similarly. I think, the way that we're talking to each other all has to be like this kind of collaborative space, speaking the same language about this topic. I also would say that something that I have really loved doing recently is making sure that we include young people's voices. They are in all of these spaces, they are in all of the online spaces, and we have so much to learn from them. Like, I grew up with social media on some level, but it's different than what, young people are growing up with now. And when I was a high school teacher, I learned so much from my students. And that was really when I started holistically thinking about these spaces and not really having this good or bad ideology, but understanding that every kind of teen that I was coming in contact with had good and bad experiences, and the way that they were using these platforms could be vastly different and have vastly different outcomes. But there were, some kind of underlying issues, like we know a lot about body image, things like that. There's trends, but centering young people's voices when they are often the ones that are really in these spaces, really exploring these spaces, can, I think, help us move towards having that similar language and discussing all these things and understanding the vastly and rapidly changing environment that we live in. If we think about how different our media landscape is now than 20 years ago, thinking about the young people who are growing up in that space and who are seeing this, within their own kind of even teen lifespan and childhood lifespan, including them in these conversations helps give us a more holistic view on what these spaces mean for these people.
Yeah, these are really important things that you all have mentioned, which is having a common framework, having a common language that we can all sort of internalize, regardless of which part of society we're operating in. And Caitlin, to your unique point of saying, how do we make sure that this common framework is not just being birthed in academia or in big tech or in some place, but without the voices of the young people involved? It's so important that we blend this together. I know there's lots of initiatives, big and small, that sort of try to do this. The most recent was the AI Summit in Paris that happened earlier this week, where again there's this consensus that is trying to be formed around ethics of AI, and I just said the A word because we hadn't said that in a long time, AI there. And so with that, I'll take the first question here, which is what emerging challenges related to technology do you see on the horizon? And if I didn't seed you with AI again, I will seed you with AI now. What emerging challenges with technology do you see on the horizon? and how should we be mitigating these challenges from the vantage point that you look at it? Duke, I'll start with you because Microsoft thinks about AI, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Well, and this may sound unusual coming from me at Microsoft, but um, everything that I've researched and everything that I've read is the more we rely on technology, the greater our abilities with human capabilities have to be. Like as AI or as artificial intelligence increases, human intelligence actually has to increase, and we have to focus on and support that. You can't have one without the other. And the example that I like to use is, our product Copilot is only as good as the data that goes in it. So the prompt that you ask, it will only provide, really great answers. Your prompt is good, but if you also are not a good editor, or you're not a strategic thinker, or you're not kind of aware of the impact of the information that's coming out and its accuracy, it's gonna greatly impact your output. And one other example, like I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I said, I like to share the story that she could at any time take her phone, take a snapshot of the inside of our refrigerator, upload that, and she would be able to get recipe ideas for things to cook. Like she would never have to actually problem solve, right, in this space. And whereas when I was 13, I had to problem solve. I had to go to the pantry, I had to look and see what was in there, and I had to think of things. I had to go to a cookbook and flip through and find a recipe. And there's something to be said about that developmental experience that exists that we should continue to promote in different ways. Otherwise, we're going to be creating those things at work for people to do because they're not going to get it at home. So how do I problem solve at work? And I joke frequently that we might end up having like woodworking and basket weaving at work because that's going to help people's brains to process and problem solve so they can actually use things like AI more effectively.
Yeah, this notion of boosting. Well, yeah, I'd love to join a woodworking class at Microsoft, by the way. The
That would
idea
be
of
awesome.
boosting critical thinking, right? In a way, because again, if you see data that you can't process as a human, that's of no use. Other points of view here.
I agree with Duke, right? In terms of just he mentioned, human intelligence needs to also, evolutionarily, like every generation you see, like, the human intelligence needs to increase along with technological advances. And that is what I'm afraid of, right? Because like he said, like, children nowadays, even in my own home, they don't use their critical thinking. That they go to is, ChatGPT, right? Like, oh, let me see. So, at least in our home, we try to promote, okay, first think through this, and then you can ask ChatGPT whatever you want to, right? And that is what I'm kind of like this endless digital consumption loops, right? It is increasing cognitive overload, and people are struggling with attention fragmentation. There's decreased deep thinking, and there's digital burnout and all of those things. And especially with this hyper realistic AI generated content, it is hard to kind of distinguish the boundaries between like real and virtual experiences seem to be blurred. And that can it can lead to increased emotional detachment, and also the potential for desensitization for real world interactions, right? So there has to be guidelines around exposure to, length of exposure to virtual environments, and of course a lot of education on digital reality versus physical reality, right? So I agree with Duke on all those points.
Great. Yeah.
I
What
think
is real, right? It's such a different concept. Go ahead.
I really think like thinking about this, what is real, making sure that we kind of keep up with the intelligence of AI and things like that, is making sure that the resources that we have in terms of digital literacy also keep up. I think something that I saw in schools is that we fall behind on these digital literacy skills. So, a lot of the media literacy, digital literacy skills that are still kind of in the realm of like, how do I tell if something is trustworthy or not? Is Wikipedia trustworthy? Is this website trustworthy? And that's just not the landscape that exists anymore. And it helps us build those critical thinking skills because, I do still, if I read Wikipedia, okay, maybe this is a good place to start, but I need to find where they got this information. And I have that, uh, critical thinking skill that was embedded in my education, but it's not keeping up with how do we critically think about the, an AI generated image. Where is this learning? That kind of back end of understanding algorithms, understanding what the AI is learning from. It's not just pulling from anything. Some of them are trained on the internet. Some of them are trained in a closed system. So if we want to build that digital, or if we want to build that critical thinking kind of threshold and continue to build, increase it as technology kind of grows and gets more competitive, I think that is a great place to start, is making sure that the ways that we're learning about this or our opportunities to learn about this technology keep up with the technology that exists.
Yeah, so it's a continuing education spectrum, not a one and done that you take it in a course. There's a couple more questions. I don't know if I'll get to all of them, but if I don't, I'll get the questions to the panelists so they can respond after. There's a question from Wendy at Pinterest. This idea of digital zones versus strict rules. Kaitlin, you talked about that, which was, hey, how do we create these zones in our homes where we can align to certain principles? Could you talk a little bit more about how such an approach addresses the different aspects of digital well-being?
Yeah, so I think, David, you mentioned as well, like the piece of belonging and things like that. I think obviously attachment in your family as you're growing up is really critical, and feeling connected to your friends and your family. And friends are often in your home spaces and at school. And so I think these expectations of like zones of where we're not going to use our phone or we're going to have conversation really helps build that sense of connection that we think of, and developing like, it's fine to like a post on Instagram. Well, maybe you did that and now you're talking about it with your family, and kind of taking anything that you've witnessed during the day and just kind of having that debrief, or having that kind of sense of building the connection between your family and your friends. And I think the other part is that, continuing to use technology, no matter how old your kids are, if they think it's cringy, is that you asked to play Fortnite with them, it builds those digital literacy skills. You now understand, like, are they using voice chat? Okay, maybe we should, maybe we're not ready for that in a couple of years. We can turn that on right now. I would be more comfortable if you're just talking to your friends. And it kind of helps build that trust as well. Because, especially teenagers, they don't want to be told what to do with no reason. So if you're coming from a place of like understanding, or they're being given a reason, they might not like it, but now they actually like have kind of a way to have a conversation with you about it, instead of it just being a rule where they're not really understanding like why that's being. So it builds trust, it builds communication, and these zones help build that, connection and sense of belonging.
I love that connection, calm communications, and of course, trust. I mean, those are all pillars that we can all lean on. Last quick question, quick fire one, because I don't want a audience member to ever go away without getting an answer to a question that they so bravely put out in chat, which is, we talk a lot in this conversation about the ways in which parents can do this or individuals can do this. What is the responsibility that companies or institutions have in providing safe digital spaces for people? We've talked a lot about how we can help individuals, but what do you think, from your perspective, that you would like to see companies and institutions provide in way of safe spaces?
I mean, yeah, I used to be in the corporate world. So yeah, I'm kind of distanced myself from it for the past 15 years. So, but here's my 2 cents, right? This whole idea of the working from home has kind of created this kind of blurred this boundary between when work shuts off and when personal life begins. So I think there has to be, maybe if it is ever a possibility, that there's a cutoff, right? You log off and that's it. You're done. You log back in the next morning. This sense of like constantly being connected to work has, a lot of people feel, in my own like friend circle, they feel even on the weekends when they hang out with that, their work phone is still on, right? Their work email is still on, and so they're constantly checking, and then they feel this responsibility to respond back, and they're expected almost within the culture to respond back right away, even though it's the weekend, even though it's 10 o'clock at night. And so, maybe if there is room for the, stricter kind of guidelines as to you don't have to respond to an email after 6 p.m., right? Things like that, more concrete kind of rules around that would be a start, but then that's my little take on that.
Yeah, I love it because digital spaces and safe digital spaces don't always mean the same thing for everyone. And in your context, you're saying, hey,
Right.
norms matter as well.
Of course.
Any other perspectives on that?
Kaitlin, I had typed something in the chat, but did you have an opinion?
No, I think that was, yeah, I was just reading your answer. It was perfect.
Well,
Excellent.
yeah, and I look at that just to reiterate. I think that we can't always count on the companies to create these safe spaces because a lot of times they're not even aware that they're unsafe yet because just everything is moving so fast. So really, the onus is on both, and the relationship has to be as an individual. We recognize when there's an unsafe space, and we know how to navigate that, and we have to teach our kids how to navigate that. And at the same time, corporations, companies, institutions must recognize when things are unsafe and put in some safety barrier or some support functions in that. And I think that companies they're putting things out there and they're testing and they're pulling them back because they recognize that they're not always landing the way that they intended to. And so that is going to continue to be the case as we go through this until we get to some critical mass here.
Thank you. Thank you, Duke. And thank you to all the panelists who were transparent and honest and real in your conversations today. We'll pause here. We have another great panel that's going to come on here in a few minutes. But again, Kaitlin, Devi, Duke, thank you for your time. And Corey, I'll turn it over to you to help us transition.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. That was, I feel like we could just keep going. So thank you for your good thinking and generous sharing of your thoughts. We are going to take about 3 to 5 minutes to sort of switch panelists. Uh, it's also a great time for folks who are attending the call to go grab some extra caffeine, grab a little lunch, whatever time it is where you are. And then don't forget to come back by 5 past the hour for the second panel. This is also a great time if you have a burning question. Feel free to drop it in the Q&A and our panelists can type out answers to questions. So we'll see y'all in about 3 to 5 minutes. And thank you to everyone who has rejoined or not left. It's always a risk giving people a break in the middle of a webinar, but hopefully most of our attendees came back for what is going to be an awesome second round with our expert panelists. So this second panel is navigating the digital wellness ecosystem. And in this one, we are talking with Swati Survey. I was not able to connect with Swati ahead of time, so I hope I got your name correct there. Tamara Lechner and AJ Rice. I will let them all introduce themselves to highlight what they feel is most important here. And as with the first round, Riz will be our fearless facilitator, and please go ahead and drop your questions into the Q&A box. It's fine if it's on a rolling basis. We'll be sure that they get answered either typing or live. So, and again, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be available after the fact for folks who weren't able to join us live. And with that, I will pass it along to you, Riz.
Fantastic. Thank you, Corey. And thank you to the panelists. So we're gonna, if you joined us in the first half of this conversation, we were looking at this challenge of digital wellness from the perspective of parent advocates, from the perspective of employers, from the perspective of therapists and doctors. We have a different set of panelists with a very different perspective. These are individuals, these are solution providers who are making a difference in the space of digital wellness to provide for a healthier internet. So I'll let the panelists introduce themselves here in just a second, but as you introduce yourselves, panelists, think of a question. Here's a question to respond, which is, if you had to change one digital habit for a month, just one, which one would be the hardest for you? Again, the importance here is to call us all out as humans, where none of us are perfect. So if you had one digital habit for a month, which one would be hardest for you to change? Swati, I'll start with you and then go to Tamara and then AJ.
Of course. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me on the panel. I think it's probably, unfortunately, I'm not very original. But I think my one digital habit would be the scrolling at night, right before I go to bed. And then I find myself in this rat hole, an endless loop of I watch reels. So I end up watching all these weird, unusual, weird reels. And then all of a sudden it's 2 hours later and I'm like, how the hell did I get here? So I think if that was the one digital habit I could change, that would be that.
Thank you for that honest reflection, Swati. And Swati, why don't you go ahead and also introduce yourself and Lightsprite?
Sure. So I'm Swati Survey, founder and CEO of Lightsprite, and we are a therapeutic gaming platform. So we build clinically validated self-help tools in the form of games. And then the data is used by providers, payers, and employers. So we have built a clinically validated mental health video game, and and it was one of the first digital tools to have clinical validation. And we've won over 30 global health innovation awards, including the first video game to win a US Surgeon General Award. And we have seen, thank you. We have seen our audience is very wide ranging and heterogeneous, from like 4 to 65. And what we've seen is we can reach those individuals who have a hard time engaging in therapy, those with moderate to severe anxiety and depression. And in a clinical setting, we have worked with patients who have PTSD, substance abuse, bipolar, as well as anxiety and depression.
Thank you for that introduction, Swati. Video games are a topic that come up quite often in the context of digital wellness, and I thought your perspectives will add a lot of great value to our discussion today. Tamara, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Tamara Lechner, and I'm joining everyone today from Victoria, BC, Canada. I chair Harvard's AI for Human Flourishing think tank and working group. And I think more important to this conversation, I'm a mom of 4, and I'm proud to say that my kids are not addicted to their phones or their technology. And I am not going to say that I did this. I lucked out having a great community, a great school. And so I'm delighted to share today what I've learned from being surrounded by a group of people who seem to be doing the right thing at helping kids to use technology rather than be used by it. The work I do at Harvard, we've created a framework with the idea that there's lots of people out there thinking about protection from harm and online safety. But I always think if you remove all those obstacles to being well, you're still at 0. And I would love us to focus on better than 0. What can we do to ensure the tools that our kids are using every day? And we know Psychology Today recently said that almost every platform teens use in 2025, YouTube, Snapchat, Reddit, Discord, Roblox, Spotify, they all have an AI algorithm behind them. So, how do we make sure that our kids are savvy users before they've even got a fully developed prefrontal cortex? So, that's where I like to play, making sure that it helps them to have better relationships, that it helps them to grow and learn rather than just making sure they're protected. And now let me talk about what I don't do well. So, going to your question is, um, I have a fairly high level of digital minimalism in my life. That doesn't mean I'm not on my phone, but I have all the notifications turned off and I use it very intentionally. I've left apps that use me as their product. So if it's something that they couldn't exist without having humans on there, you're not going to find me there anymore. But as a mom of four, and I have kids who have a spectrum of challenges, whether it's health challenges or they're athletes or they're dancers, and they need to find me. And so I find that I struggle to turn off uh, my ringer for them. And I think it is the rudest thing that a human can do to pull yourself away from an in-person, face-to-face conversation to suddenly be texting and checking. And so I have implemented a specific sound for my kids, and I will turn it off when I'm at work or when I'm doing something really important. But they know that I've put a break in where if they try me 3 times in a row, it will come through. And so I almost have this level of panic that happens when I hear that ringtone. So it is something I would love a solve for. I don't know what it is, but that's something I could certainly improve at.
My goodness, that's a high bar for all of us to work towards. But I love that story and the ways that you're sort of still being available for your family with using technology there as well. AJ, you might have something to say about technology and devices.
Yeah, so my name's AJ Rice. I'm the founder and CEO of a startup called Zalpha Mobile. We sell dumb phones for kids, so physical handset mobile devices. The basic idea is that our phones have basic communication, but not access to the whole internet and everything that comes with it. We like to say we combine the modern look and feel of a smartphone with the limited functionality of about 15 or 20 years ago. As far as my personal struggles with technology use, I think, running a small business, I'm very frequently connected to work and have trouble completely disconnecting from work email and availability. I do actually have one of our dumb phones that I use as my only phone. So when I'm out in the world, I do not have access to email, but I am a frequent nighttime and vacation email checker, and that would be very difficult for me to completely part ways with if I had to. But hopefully the business grows to that point one day. And one of the beauties of running a business is you can set the norms in that business. So people who work for me know that if they need to absolutely get a hold of me, that call or text is the best way to do it. But still something I struggle with nonetheless.
Fantastic. Thank you, AJ. And the idea of a phone that provides for all of the utility without maybe some of the extraction that otherwise smartphones might provide is something that's appealing to a increasingly wider audience these
Yes.
days. Swati, maybe I'll start with you with our first question. You talked about Lightsprite and video games. Your video games are clinically validated, as you mentioned. Um, how do you and your team address the tension between creating something that's engaging, enjoyable, but still managing the downsides that come from, excessive gaming or tech addiction? Because gaming, again, as you know, is often looked at as the thing that the slippery slope that drags kids into feeling quote unquote addicted. How do you and your team manage that tension? And Swati, you might want to come off of mute there.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I think it's a very important question because there is a tension. But the reality of it is any experience, whether it's a video game or think of Twitter or Facebook, which aren't games either, any digital experience can be designed to drive engagement or drive disengagement. And when you look at, for a lot of these platforms, their monetization is based on people on the platform. So by default, and even games, the default is we have to keep them on the platform. That is in direct conflict with a health solution, because that's not the point of any kind of intervention that's driving some sort of health benefit. You want to keep the user engaged as long as they need to receive the support or the benefit from the intervention that they're participating in. So that's how we think about it. And by the way, those platforms can also drive disengagement. There are video games such as mobile, for example, many mobile games. If they're resource-based or time-based sorts of events in there, there will literally be nothing else to do after 10 minutes. And you'll have to wait and come back. Like, the gardening or the Sim Cities, right? At a certain point, there's not much more you can do. So you have to turn it off and come back. So when you think about that, I encourage to think about, because we're talking about digital experiences overall. It's not just games, but, we've all talked about this idea of, like, even me, how we're too engaged at certain points in our lives with these digital solutions. And so you think about, in a healthcare setting or a health environment, what is the level of engagement I need? And then what do I need to do? And what am I doing with the end user during that point of engagement to drive the outcome? So we talk about clinically relevant engagement metrics. So I don't report on daily active users, because for a mental health intervention, it doesn't matter how many people are using it. It matters how is the person improving from when they started to where they are at the end of the program, which for us is 6 weeks, right? And then we've worked with clinicians to identify what that engagement level needs to be. So we set those metrics accordingly, and then we measure them. And then we also measure that against the engagement. Then we also say, well, is there actually any movement on the clinical screens that clinicians typically use? And for us, it's the GAD-7 and the PHQ-8. So we settled on those. So I think that's the way we've thought about it. It's actually driven, we've actually codified that by contributing this insight into the standards for the CTA, the Consumer Technology Association, and their standards for building effective mental health solutions. And that's a free resource that if you're building mental health solutions, you'd probably want to take a look at that.
I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but there were so many cool things that you talked about, which are really interesting, particularly the idea that you and your team aren't looking at daily active users. That's which would be almost blasphemy if you walked into a traditionally SaaS-based organization, SaaS, software as a service, where user retention matters and user eyeballs matter. And so it's really cool to see your team take a deliberate stance to say what matters to us is not, daily active users, but instead it's usage for the sake of a clinical outcome. So the North Star that you set for yourself and your team is really, really cool to look at.
Thank you.
Excuse me about that. Tamara, I'll turn it over to you. You talked about artificial intelligence and a framework, which is, I think, something that could come in really handy, not just for individuals to use, but also for organizations who are trying to now reorient themselves towards what does the world look like in the context of artificial intelligence? So maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about what does this mean to have a framework, who can use this framework, and why should they care about a framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're still figuring out who's going to use it and why they care, because in our capitalistic society, like you were just saying to Swati, that she's one of the few who's not measuring hours spent and how much are we addicting these people to use our technology. And so part of the science of human flourishing, and let's start actually just by defining what that means, because I think people have an idea of what it might mean, but I like to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So when we talk about flourishing, we're talking about humans reaching their full potential through the behaviors and the conditions that help them to feel well. So well could be happy, it could be at peace. They are able to do good work, whether that's at school or in the office, and they feel like they're contributing to something that is meaningful to them. So you are flourishing when you're feeling good, functioning well, and contributing meaningfully. And there's been so many papers on the science of flourishing. One that comes to mind a lot, and I'm going to go back again to what Swati was saying. We teach this in schools, and when we teach kids the science of being in the zone, they get really excited because they think that it's given them the proof to take to their parents to say, I'm in the zone when I'm playing video games. And so I should be allowed to play them for 13 hours a day because they came and told me from Harvard that that is good for me to spend some time in flow. And so our framework is that nice reminder that you can't spend all your time in one domain. You can't eat foods from only one food category. So a certain amount of nuts is great for your diet, but if you only ate nuts, you're not going to be healthy. And so we're saying the same thing, that spending some time in the zone on a game is wonderful, but you also need positive relationships. You need to think of your personal well-being. If you're staying up half the night gaming, you're not going to be well. So what we did was we took this science, we looked at years and years of studies and connected what we already knew about the science of flourishing to AI and how AI can make that better. So two places that we often begin are protection from harm. It is important, incredibly important, that we are making sure the platforms are safe, that the people on the platforms are safe. So that's, of course, a non-starter. We also have fair AI. We need to look at the information that it's been fed to know, okay, is this got bias? Is it inaccurate? Whose voices aren't represented? And so that's another one that's really important. But then from there, in the business setting, when people think of LLMs, they think of productivity. We're going to do this faster. We're going to make more widgets to sell for more money, and it's going to make us richer. But we want to also consider what happens with that extra time that is freed up when you don't need to spend so much time researching, or you can do your job more quickly. Who owns those hours? So thinking ethically about those questions, thinking about AI can be used to track time on a device or time doing your job. But is that the highest and best use? Is measuring time really what matters versus measuring the quality of output? And so we started to think from this framework of two working groups, the people using a tool, and they could look at the tool they're choosing through the framework and ask questions like, am I safe? What is it built on? Is it encouraging me to take breaks, to stand up, to move my body? Is it allowing me to learn something, or am I relying on it and forgetting how to think? Is it encouraging me to talk with other humans and think critically, or is it just feeding me information and I'm losing that ability? So that is the one use case. But then the other use case that we didn't expect is people who are building technology would love to be able to stamp a seal of approval on their technologies that says this positively impacts humans. And so what we're looking at doing now is taking these founders and builders and product dev teams through this framework so that they can say what we have built has a positive impact either on one aspect or on all aspects of human flourishing. And that's our big picture dream, you and I know that having humans agree on what's a good outcome is really difficult. And so we know that it's a very big task we've taken, and yet what we're seeing is we're finding the others who are thinking about humans first, and that is really, I love progress. I'm an early adopter of technology, and I always want to center humans and make sure that this is more about the human and less about the product.
There's so many cool notions in this idea that you just stepped through, Tamara, which is, and the one that strikes me the most is this: is it positive for the human experience, right? Not net zero, positive for the human experience. And however we define the positivity to show up in this framework, those are really critical parts. At a recent launch, at a recent Tesla product launch, where they introduced taxis and cars that you can just step in without a steering wheel. Elon Musk at some point stood up on stage and said, "Hey, now you have extra time." And he paused to say, "Well, now you can scroll more, I guess." And so that is such an important thing to think about, right? It's the other part of this productivity function, which is, yes, you might have extra time because LLMs are doing things that are the repetitive things. But what else are you going to do with this time? That is a very important part of that discussion. And I'm so pleased that you and your team are thinking through that aspect and coaching other product developers as well. AJ, to you, as you're thinking about products in your context, how are you thinking of minimalism? Tamara introduced the idea of minimalism in her life. What does minimalistic look like for you from a product design standpoint, where it provides the functionality, but still, again, avoids the slippery slope of quote unquote addiction?
Yeah, so I think a few things that first I think of in three types of functionality that we access on the internet. The first is things that either you or for us, we're focused specifically on kids, so that kids are probably better off never using ever. The second type of functionality is things that they might want to use sometimes and might benefit from sometimes, but don't need access to in their pocket 24 hours a day. And then the third is, what do they need access to on their person at all times? And we can argue about what's in that first category or that second category, but the reality is the number of things that people, and particularly kids, need on their person, in their pocket, access to 24 hours a day is a really small number of things. And I think one of the reasons we're focused on phones as a company is that I think there's a beauty to, even if you want to access technology sometimes, that when you're out in the world, when you're at dinner, when you're hanging out with friends, when you're playing a sport, when you're at school, whatever it may be, that technology is in a separate place. So whether it's video games, whether it's social media, that you have access to these things in moderation, but they're kind of gone when you're out doing something else. So for us, it's really, what do we need that's absolutely essential on your phone? The other question we get all the time is, I hear the ask from parents and from kids of, "Oh, your phone has exactly what we want, but I need one extra thing." And then another parent comes, "Oh, I need one extra thing." And they all want one or two different things. So you can add all those things, but then you're all the way back at a full-featured smartphone. So, then some people say, "Oh, well, then just give me more options to set all the restrictions of what I can have my kid access, what I cannot have them access, and give me a lot of choices." But then the setup gets really complicated, and the kids are, as quite clever at getting around a lot of the restrictions that we set up. So our approach has really been to, how can we create a dedicated device that comes out of the box, ready to go, with no setup, no configuration, and really no options. It's just, it does 5 things. And if you want to do something else than those 5 things, then you have to buy a different product. So, we have a product with a very focused utility for specific use cases. And we're, trying to stay within our narrow lane versus letting more and more features creep onto our devices. you're on mute, Riz.
That couldn't have been an easy discussion either within your team or with your investors, because everyone wants to be Swiss Army knife, right?
Yeah.
You have to meet everyone everywhere at the same time. And it's lovely to hear you sticking your lane to say, no, this is what we are focused on because we've deemed these 5 or 6 things to be the most important things for kids to have. And I think that is, again, refreshing to hear because that's not typically the case in these spaces. Swati, I'll turn to you for the question because, again, the idea of clinical validation, which is the hard work that you and your team have accomplished, that's a question that comes up often in this space for people that are thinking about digital wellness solutions, which is how do we prove to the world that this thing is actually useful or valuable? And even for potential users of these frameworks, such as parents or employers that are trying to get a signal to say, how do we know this works? I certainly get that at Scroll by Choice all the time to say, how do we know, Riz, that your framework works? Can you talk to us a little bit about the journey that you and your team went through towards building this product that was clinically validated? Because I'm sure there's people in the audience who could learn from your journey as well.
Sure. I mean, so just to give context, when we did this, we started this in 2014. So this was well before anybody was even thinking about this. To your point, and back to what I was saying before, everybody was looking at these other metrics that just from my perspective, just really weren't driving what we were looking at. You should be looking at health outcomes. So, we worked with we work with psychologists from the beginning. And we asked them, what does it need to look like? What does outcomes need to look like? What are the scales that we need to evaluate? So we started with the subject matter experts first, and they guided us. We did not indicate, and they chose. And by the way, at the time we started with 5, and actually we collected all this data online. We did our clinical validation. We were the first. We used real world evidence, so that's also another thing that eventually what we ended up doing, the industry started calling real world evidence. So we collected the data online. We were running these trials. This is before Apple released their research kit. Like, we were already doing it, but we had the consent forms online. We had the GAD and the PHQ online. We had LSAT, and there was like life quality scores. There were like 5 different measures, right? And so we were running this while we were testing our beta. And eventually, once we got enough information, and by the way, this is I should also preface this. This is an absolutely imperfect science, and you'll hear the purists or what the traditional method has been randomized control trials, and yes, and there are those that you can do that, but it's also very expensive and very time consuming. And the other challenge is quite often by the time the publication comes out, the technology moved on, which is why actually since 2008, the NIH, Kaiser Foundation, NSF has been saying clinical trials are not the way to evaluate digital health interventions. So, so I think for us, we started with the clinicians and said, okay, what are the measures that we should be using? We didn't make up measures. We didn't make up metrics. And we saw other companies doing that. And then we collected essentially the same information that you would have if we were running a trial on a site, right? But instead of having a case manager or a program manager filling out the forms, we were doing it online. So it was a different, now one could say the goalposts have moved, right? But we collected a lot of data. We did get the publication, and yet, even within the industry, payer providers, they still seem focused on measures or need ends and clinical efficacy that, it's possible, but I think there's still a level of caution and to a point of risk aversion where it can become detrimental to having some of these interventions introduced. Because, we have our paper, but then I can show you all the data that we've collected since then, right? But now, and there's a trade-off. And I think the industry is not comfortable with that. They want everything, right? And that's that risk aversion. And there's no willingness to say, okay, what am I going to trade off so I can actually get people to have help, right? No, I was talking to a provider very recently, and we had clinical validate, we had our papers, we had a health economic outcomes report done by a Research One university, we had case studies, we had live data of over 300 people at this point that had pre and post. We even did an analysis in between our paper and then we did an analysis to ensure that there was some correlation. But we also couldn't publish any of this because to publish, you need the demographic information, right? But I have to make a choice. Do I want to offer a solution that's going to help someone? Or am I going to sit there and collect all this data? Because I can tell you this, no one's going to be filling out a form when they're having anxiety and depression issues, right? So which one is it? But despite all of this information, and they had said, well, an N of 100 is fine. We gave them an N of 124 with the analysis that we were able to do, but I couldn't tell you the demographics, right? And it still wasn't enough. And it still came back to, well, we don't even know who would use it in our patient population, even though I gave them very specific characteristics of the people that do use it and gave case study examples. So this is the challenge because, clinical validation gets thrown around, but it's becoming used as a way for people to, and pardon my frankness, hide behind the reason to say no instead of saying yes. Because it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to get an RCT. And if you do, by the way, it's going to be a pharma company. And you can be sure that by the way, that was the other thing. Our results, we gave the same results as Otsuka Pharmaceuticals. It was on par. And we spent 1/10 of the money to get those results. But that still wasn't enough. So I posit to everybody here, what are you comfortable with? Yes, it should be validated and there should be safety and should follow best practices, but it's not going to be perfect.
Swati, first of all, the passion that you and your team, I know, have gone through this journey and lived this journey, and the bar. You said the goalposts are moving, and that's such a rings so true for anyone that's trying to improve the outcome, whether it's of adults or youth or kids in the space of digital wellness, because the metric of success for someone else who's creating such a trap is engagement, right? If you can commercialize it, if you can bring money in, if you can actually bring attention, let alone money, that's pretty good. Whereas what you have to develop on the other end is a lot, right? To say, first of all, does it work? Is it that quote unquote clinically validated? Who's paying for it? There's so many different questions to answer on the solution front. And I think that's a lopsided nature of the world that we're in currently. And clearly companies like Lightspread are working through that challenge. Tamara, I'll turn to you because you're at the earlier part of this funnel where you are building this framework. You have a massive organization in the name of Harvard that's sort of behind this construct. And you're also grappling with what is metrics of success going to look like for companies and organizations that adopt this. How do you think about success metrics?
That's a really good question. And I think I want to go to the very realistic, parent-friendly answer, which is asking your kids, how do you feel after you were using them? And we know that technology is trying to do relationship control and isolation. It is engineered dependency. It is reality distortion. It's manipulating kids who don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, and there's dangerous consequences. So there was a really interesting study where they were trying to compare a whole college who were not using their phones with a whole college that was. And so they went around the college campus and they thought, we're going to pay these kids to not go online. They'll love money. College kids want money. And they couldn't get anybody to participate because of that norms that was talked about in the first hour of the panel. These norms are huge for teenagers. What was interesting was they asked the student body, how would we get you to do this? And they said, just make everybody do it. And so I think what I'm getting to is very much what Swati was saying. And I think very similar to what AJ is talking about with resetting the norms for use. It's not going to be regulated. We've seen this. You were talking about Paris earlier and the AI regulatory lack thereof. And I think we have to decide as parents, as humans who care for the next generation, we know they're not feeling good and functioning well. The stats are off the charts. If you look at Jonathan Haidt's most recent book, and every parent should read that book, kids are struggling. They know they're not feeling well. They know they need help. They told us, if you will tell us all to be off our phones, we will actually pay you. The average student on a campus said they would pay $50 if you would make it a rule that they couldn't be on their phones. So they're wanting our help, but they're not willing to ask for our help. And so for me, the first metric is, how do you feel after you've used whatever the technology product is? In the adult world, this looks like, are you being pulled by distractions all day long? When we filter something through our framework, a great example is Slack. The founder of Slack lives just down the street from me. And it was designed to help teams communicate better. So that's a really noble cause. And it works really well for a certain size of team. You're able to work remotely, but still stay connected. And then it became overwhelming that you had 400 threads and you couldn't follow the messages. But they built in some other really cool things. If you type in something, I typed in the other day, hey guys, and a little thing popped up and said, we're not all guys here. You might want to change your language. So it's helping me to notice my bias and change my language. That's a good thing. When I talk to our team, I might type at everyone because I want the whole AI for Human Flourishing team. And I'll get another little pop-up that says, hey, you've got people on 20 time zones. Are you sure you want to ping them all right now? And so I think as humans, we can see that these things are helping us. And then we can also see this is too distracting. I don't need these notifications on. And so we really need to start helping students check their guts to know what works for them and what doesn't, but then set them up with norms around their culture, around their classrooms, around their houses. Watch what they don't want to do what your parents tell them. They want to do what their parents are doing. And so I think for me, the metrics are in no way formalized. It's, how are we trending? Are most of us doing better? Are most of us feeling good? Are we more connected or less connected? And those are the simple things that when you know, and you don't need to be doing all of the formal research-based interventions to know if you feel good or bad.
That's again, I love the richness of perspectives here, because depending on where we're coming from, the metrics here are going to jut against us in different ways. AJ, I want to ask the same question to you, but for one quick second, I want to talk to the audience to say, if you have questions, please start to plop them in. In a few minutes, we'll open up to the panel to take any questions that you might have as well. So please start to do that. We'll make sure we get your questions in. AJ, what does success look to from your vantage point for your customers? What kind of metrics of success do you live in?
Yeah, I think, one of the things, echoing, some of the other folks today, but a lot of this stuff is very difficult to measure. And, we're trying, whether we're trying to create human flourishing, or we might have a different word for it, but just, creating kids that are thriving in all aspects, both, emotionally and intellectually. How do we evaluate that at the individual level is very tough. So at the business metrics that we view, to put cards on the table, is, well, we don't want people to cancel their service with us and replace our device with another one a month after purchasing, that's a bad sign. If they stay and continue to use our devices for a couple of years, that's a much better indicator. And then the other one is we have a customer referral program. So just the idea that people are referring other parents they know that, hey, that's probably an indication that they at least think it's working well for them. So those are the two main things. We don't care about usage. We actually make more money if people use our products less because we pay a little bit for the consumption and charge them a flat monthly fee for self-service on the devices. And if they use less, talk and text and data, our costs are a little bit lower. It doesn't make a huge difference, but because the usage is all really low, kind of regardless of what they do, because our phones don't do a whole lot. But theoretically, if they use it less, we make even more money. So we don't have that incentive that a lot of companies do. I think at a macro level in the US, we're certainly seeing a lot of troubling signs as it relates to, anxiety, depression, suicidality, a number of mental health metrics. And then we also just got, a few weeks ago, update in terms of academic progress and forgetting the national report card, the latest test of, 8th and 4th grade, scores in math and reading. And we've seen kind of a pretty significant decline over the last decade that worsened post 2020 and COVID school lockdowns. So, a lot of things to be concerned about there, but attributing cause to a specific technology or a specific app is very difficult. And I'd love to see, better data collection and metrics, whether it's randomized controlled trials and seeing some long-term studies on what are the effects of smartphones on children versus a controlled group or maybe our phones or something like that. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's again so many different perspectives, and I love that you are calling out this panel, particularly from a health standpoint. And so maybe as you think about it with the same magic wand I gave other panelists before, if you had a magic wand and you could imagine a cross-sector, something that connects the employers to healthcare leaders, to school leaders, and parent leaders, what kind of a unified approach would support your work as in the space of digital wellness? What would you like to see come about to further the work that you're doing with digital wellness? And it's open to all, so feel free to jump in with whomever has a perspective.
I can go. What I was just talking about is something I'd like to see, particularly from the healthcare space, is better, kind of better metrics on what is and isn't affecting youth mental health, and particularly long-term randomized controlled trials on you give one group of kids smartphones and you give another group of kids either dumb phones or no phones or something, and you see what happens over a multi-year period in terms of their success across a variety of metrics. And I think we can do that in more targeted ways with specific apps or functions, but having long-term randomized controlled trials it's very, very expensive, as Swati mentioned, and it takes a while to get results. But I think that would be really helpful and informative in helping us make sure that, hey, is what we're doing, does it actually make sense, and does it actually improve the mental health of intellectual health of the people that we're trying to improve those metrics for.
Any other perspectives to add? If you had your magic wand.
I think that the common language we are using, which I know Duke mentioned in the last panel, but I do believe it's incredibly important that going to the basics, the only industries that call their clients users are technology and drugs. And I'd love to switch that language so that the individual felt more powerful. Um, just changing simple, subtle cues in our language to encourage us to be the ones in charge rather than being yanked around by technology. AI, especially, is unfolding faster than any other innovation that we've seen historically. And our human brains don't evolve that quickly. So I think one of my concerns is that if we don't start putting some regulations globally in place, um, we hear two groups of people. Some people think of this as a race, and others are seeing it as this curious, exciting time where everything is going to change. I think we have to change that race because it puts in our minds that there's a winner and a loser. I would love to put language in place where we're all better because of this technology. There isn't someone at the top and someone at the bottom. I would love to hear us understanding what are we talking about when we say addictive technology? What are we talking about when we're talking about age gating? So that we're educated across borders and we've got global norms. There are huge health and war instances where we've been able to establish norms that we vaccinate for certain diseases, that we don't participate in certain types of warfare. We've been able to do this as a species. And I think it's really important that we do this now for our technology before it's developing faster than we can stay ahead of it.
Really interesting on the concept of norms there. Swati, anything to add?
Can you repeat the question so I make sure I'm thinking about it
Yeah,
right?
if you had a magic wand to wave, what would you want to come about across different sectors, whether it's health, employers, to further your work?
Um, I think, for us, because we have a solution, we know who it can work for and under what circumstances. And I think just having greater receptivity and openness to employ that, because this is a technology that isn't emerging or new now, right? And everybody keeps talking about wanting to solve mental health problems, and we have a shortage of therapists everywhere, and nobody can get care. Yet there are solutions, not just me, but others that can be deployed. But it seems like for whatever reason, and it's not a logical issue, I don't know what it is, but it's not a data issue. It's not an information issue. It's not a lot. You're not going, everyone says they're outcomes based, but then you look at the Tiches is not outcomes based because I see a lot of companies and providers using tools that have no clinical validation. Right. So, and when presented with the information, they still don't want to adopt. So, and that's a shame because there are people in need that we know we can help, but we can't get access to them.
Yeah, that is a tough challenge, and I think a real one that so many of us that are trying to make an improvement face as well. I want to pause here. I want to thank the panelists, Swati, Tamara, AJ. Thank you for your time. I know that the space that you're in is evolving faster than we can all collectively keep up. So I appreciate the work that you and your teams are doing to further this dialogue. And with that, Corey, I'm going to turn it over to you to help close us out today and give the audience what they need for next steps.
Yeah, sorry about that. Again, way too many screens open. Um, thank you, everyone, for your great thinking and your sort of deep thinking on all of this. Folks who were joining as participants, if you have questions, if you have other thoughts that come up, please feel free to send them to me or Riz anytime. We're happy to get them to the right people. I'll remind everybody about the networking spreadsheet if you would like to share your information there. And then I will also just remind everyone about the Inspired Internet Pledge. So if you are not already a member, if you've not already joined the movement, we would love to have you. The purpose of the pledge, again, is to bring together everyone. We, as you can see in this conversation, we no one person, no one organization, no one perspective has the solution to creating a healthy and safe online world and digital ecosystem for all of us. We all struggle with it, and especially for young people. And so we are trying to bring together everyone who has a part to play in that digital ecosystem to work the problem and make some real change. And so I invite you to learn more about it, and please definitely reach out if you would like to learn more about joining the pledge. We have convenings throughout the year. Some are like this one that are very topic based. Some are larger workshops, and some are convenings just of the pledge signatories and advisors. So we welcome you to join this incredibly important, incredibly difficult, and incredibly fun and exciting work with us. Information is on your screen about how you can find us, and you'll receive a follow-up message with our email addresses. And again, this recording will be available for everyone within the next few days. Riz, anything you'd like to say to close us out?
I just want to say thank you. It's again the Safer Internet Day today. So for everyone that spent the time here today, you have already contributed to enriching yourself with the perspectives that could help youth and adults around the world get better at using the internet. And if we can ever be of help, Corey and I's contacts are on the slides here, and they'll be in the spreadsheet here in a moment. So reach out, and thank you all for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Have great days.
Thank you.